So we stand on the brink of a technological revolution that will fundamentally alter the way we live, work, and interact with one another. In its scale, scope, and intensity, this transformation is unlike anything that humankind has ever seen before. These are not my words. These are the words of this beautiful looking human being over there. His name is Klaus Schwab. He is a German engineer. He's also the chairman and the founder of the World Economic Forum. So cursory search for Klaus Schwab, it'll bring up a lot about the fourth industrial revolution. He talks a lot about it, and the World Economic Forum is famous primarily for a single event that they run once a year in this tiny little town called Davos in Switzerland, where Klaus is really famous for getting around about 2,500 people, bearing in mind the city or the town only has about 10,000 people out of season. These guys flock to Davos. They're politicians, leaders of countries, they're rock stars like Bono, and very wealthy people who can just afford a ticket. And so what Klaus has managed to do is get these people around a table to talk about the pressing issues of the day. For the last couple of years, Klaus has been urging these leaders, these politicians, to talk about a single concept, which is this so-called fourth industrial revolution. And there's three reasons why Klaus is both excited and terrified by this concept of this revolution. The first is the velocity with which this revolution is happening. The reason why he calls it a revolution is because its speed is such that it's not happening in a linear capacity, it's happening in an exponential capacity. So it's growing so quickly that we can hardly keep track of it, right? The second is the scope. The fact is it's so broad and it's impacting so many areas within our lives that it's difficult to talk about it in one forum. So he's taking many years to talk about this concept. And the third is the systems impact of the fourth industrial revolution. And so effectively, it's got no historical precedent, which is why Klaus is urging us to call it the fourth industrial revolution. So, you know, I mean, I'm not going to go into the detail of the first three, but and I think I'll leave that to Rich. But it's a concept whereby he's urging us to really take note of the impact of this, as well as to be mildly worried about the impact. So there's a lot of companies in Europe and North America that are really pushing forward with all these different topics that he talks about: AR, VR, nanotech, big data, machine learning, etc. And it's not just Europe and North America. It's also in South Africa. We have a really strong community of entrepreneurs here, and many of them have actually stood on the Heavy Chef stage. So this photograph is a photo of Andrew Watkins Ball, who spoke in February in the beginning of this year about his company Jumo and the impact that it is having. So he is one of a host of speakers that we've had talking about these topics. Andrew's doing some incredible things. His company Jumo, I think it started about 3 years ago. He left Europe after selling his company for, it was about $670 million, flying under the radar, coming back here, starting with 3 people about 3 or 4 years ago. And now I think he's got about 250 people. And he's disrupting essentially the way people are transacting online. He is reaching the unbanked, and he's doing it through their mobile phones. So he's basically disrupting an entire industry. So, you know, the way people usually get the kind of services that we're so used to, we go through gatekeepers such as banks and insurance companies. No longer, not with Jumo's technology. Essentially what he has done and what his company is doing, most of their employees, their staff, are data scientists, comm scientists, just AI specialists and so on, that are really looking into the way we can algorithmically algorithmically glean the data that is generated on our mobile phones based on our behavior. So effectively, these unbanked, so to speak, they will use their mobile phone as they would, and the data that's generated via this usage then allows Jumo to predetermine whether this person, this individual, is likely to pay back a loan, or if that person is viable for an insurance product, or a host of other services, and effectively going straight through to those users. Earlier this year in March, we had Simon Dingle, who's one of the foremost proponents and minds on blockchain, and he was speaking about the way the blockchain is predicating the fall of many industries, such as education, medicine, banking. My favorite quote from his talk was, if you know of anybody who's studying law right now, tell them to do a side project in computer science, because their whole world is about to change. Talking about essentially the way legal contracts are being served and the law is going to be utilized in the future. I heard today about the way the services industry, in fact, just about an hour earlier, that Scott Adams, I don't know if anyone remembers who Scott Adams is, but the founder of Dilbert, has just launched a cryptocurrency that allows people in their downtime, who usually provide some kind of a service to a team of people, and it allows them to use that downtime to be exchanged for cryptocurrency. So, as Kaylee was saying, everything is changing. We spoke to Nicholas Carey, the founder of blockchain, on a tour that we went on earlier this year. We do these entrepreneur tours, and we went through to Shoreditch in London, which is essentially the capital of the fintech world. And we had an unbelievable chat to this guy. He's the founder of basically the biggest Bitcoin wallet in the world. And he was talking a lot about, the way cryptocurrency is allowing us to transact easier, and how it's going to impact so many people's lives. And almost as a throwaway comment, he said to Kaylee, all the people in this, all the stuff in this room, it's crazy that in 2017, with Bloomberg just across the way and Shoreditch in London, some of the biggest banks in the world, it would take longer to FedEx this stuff in this room to New York than it would to transfer money from Shoreditch to New York. And so that is no longer the case with regards to the technology that he is purporting. So if we look at, and I encourage you, by the way, to go and look at some of these talks on the Heavy Chef website, because some of them are just mind-blowing. We've spoken about in the past couple of months about drone technology. I mean, no 4IR slide deck would be complete without robots, right? So in February this year, Precision Instrument Factory in the Shandong province in China, I actually just made that up. I think it's in Southeast Asia. So they announced that it was going to replace 90% of their employees with robots. And it did so, right? 90% of its employees. And immediately afterwards, they announced a 250% increase in productivity. And more scary, an 80% drop in defects. So the common theme of all of this is that there is disruption everywhere. And as Klaus says, we must be scared for our jobs. We must both embrace this fourth industrial revolution, but we must also be worried, because there's a lot of stuff going on, and we've seen precedent of this, right? So companies like Blockbuster and Kodak, I think it had 250,000 employees in 1998. What happened to Kodak? Blockbuster, it had 60,000 employees in 2004, and within 12 years, it has now 12 stores around the world. This is a photograph of one of the last stores. There's the 12, I think 8 of them are owned by one guy, a guy called Alan Payne, and they just keep plodding along. They even have a Twitter account, which I encourage you to follow. It's probably one of the funniest Twitter accounts. It's one of the funniest. It's a glass dropper. It's one of the funniest Twitter accounts that I follow. It's really, really good. So I encourage you to go and check out it's at Learn Blockbuster. And interestingly with Netflix was that Netflix approached them, I think it was in 2001, and offered a partnership and showed them the technology and so on. The thing about Netflix, what it was offering was a better way of doing business. So Blockbuster obviously had this massive, titanic hold or grip on the entertainment industry back then. And so it refused, famously, it's one of the biggest refusals in business folklore. But essentially, the thing about Netflix is that it is not solving a distribution problem or an entertainment problem. It's solving a diversity problem. So what Netflix actually purports itself to do is that it invests a huge amount of money and its time and effort looking at artificial intelligence and delivering the kind of value to you as an individual, a diverse individual with unique characteristics, because it wants to be a global player, obviously. So last year, Netflix increased its spend 38% on artificial intelligence, and it will keep doing so. I think that's about 10% of their revenue, which is incredible that, this is what you would think is an entertainment company, but it's not. So there's a lot of doomsday prophecies around now. And there's another one that, I think it's Oxford University released a report, and it said that in the next 25 years, 50% of jobs that we currently hold today will just disappear. There will not be those types of jobs anymore. And this quote, the instrument of labor, when it takes the form of a machine, immediately becomes a competitor of the workman himself. Who knows who said that? Anyone? We got a winner in Joburg. Anyone want to there's a bottle of wine in this? Nobody? Somebody said Karl Marx. This is Karl Marx. At the back there, bottle of wine. So, this is Karl Marx. And he said this in 1867. This was said in one of the previous industrial revolutions. So, this is getting to the point of my talk. I want to get to this guy. And this guy's name is Heinrich Gottfried Klaus. I actually wanted to call this talk the tale of the two Klauses, or the house that Klaus built, or something like that. Anyway, so the thing about Heinrich is that he was one of the many people within licensed teams in New York City. He was an immigrant from Europe, and he came through to New York thinking of a better world, and he joined this one of these licensed teams called the dirt carting team. And what the dirt carting team guys did was they cleaned up poo. New York had a real traffic problem back then, and it wasn't due to cars, it was due to horses. And so New York had essentially a really, really foul problem that they needed to solve. And they employed people like Heinrich to resolve the issue that was basically to the tune of 1,200 metric tons of poo every day on the streets of New York. But now at the same time that Heinrich was working, people were, this picture is roughly at about 1895, and people were predicting the fall of roughly about 50% of people's jobs. So essentially this is nothing new. So if we look at the lessons of the previous industrial revolution and we look today, what lessons can we learn from the previous class? And we look at what our current class is saying. We must be worried and scared but excited and so on. I think there's a story in all of this. And the story that I want to tell is that the reason why he was worried was because at the same time that he was working, there was a revolution happening in the garages around the United States. Everybody with a set of tools and half a brain was starting to essentially build stuff. They were building motorbikes, cars, anything they could really think of, because that was the type of things that people were getting up to in those days. This is the first Harley Davidson that was ever made. It was sold in 2003 by William Harley and Arthur Davidson, but it was one of hundreds of motorcycle brands that was evolving in the day. And these guys were popping up all over the country. They had names like Ace, Cleveland, Crocker, Cushman, Yale, the Flying Whizzer, and hundreds of others. And everybody was having fun. It's similar to what we've seen in the last decade. As we heard, my previous industry was digital marketing, and everybody who got their hands on WordPress or any of the CMSs out there was building websites, right? So everybody was trying to do something from their garages, not too dissimilar to back then. Take a guess how many of those hundreds of brands existed at the turn of this century. Does anyone take a guess in 2000? How many? 5? Mike, that's cheating. You know the answer. Mike's heard me talk about this before. So there was only one. Yeah, you spoiled it. You spoiled the punchline, Mike. So there was only one. In 100 years, out of all of those hundreds of brands, one bike brand actually made it through. And it was Harley Davidson. So the lesson I want to speak to tonight, the lesson I want to provide for the current Klaus and retrofit to the previous class, is the lesson that we can learn from these guys. That essentially, how did they survive? Because it's not like there wasn't tumultuous times back then. It wasn't like everything was changing back then. There was, in the last 100 years, I mean, there was 2 great economic crises. There was massive energy crises. There was huge competition from the Japanese and the German and the European bikes that came through. And yet somehow or another, they survived and thrived. This picture is their biggest competitor. At the turn of the century, this brand called Indian came up, and this is their headquarters. It was the Indian Motorcycle Company's headquarters in Springfield in the United States, no relation to the Simpsons. But that factory was just a miracle of industrial genius. It was the size of 18 football fields, similar to what you'd expect from Amazon or Google or the new Apple campus, something as spectacular as that. Yet they didn't survive. They closed up shop in about 1945. Now, why did this brand that featured, in so many movies and so on survive? And I think it's something that we can take on board now. I mean, if you look at what happened, and there's a story about how Harley Davidson in the turn of the 70s to the 80s were months away from bankruptcy. And an extraordinary thing happened. It was astonishing how the leaders, faced with not being able to pay their staff, within months were on the verge of a shutdown. Their clientele got together and started rallying together. And I don't know if anyone rides motorcycles here, but you'll know that rallies are a big part of, the biking folklore, and particularly in Harleys. But they created these rallies to drive up support, to raise money, to essentially keep Harley Davidson afloat. And I don't know if you've heard of the nickname HOG. It comes from the word Harley Owners Group, which is effectively the name HOG, where it came from. These groups formed into these guys called Harley Owners Groups, and they saved the company. They rallied around the brand. And why? Why did they do such a thing? Can you imagine Telkom's customers doing that? Or Sanlam, I know there's some guys from Sanlam, sorry. But or I don't know, can you see, or what about Toyota? Or even BMW, which is quite a rad brand. But I don't see them doing that, yet they did it for those guys. Now, the reason I think you're kind of getting to the point is that Harley gave people meaning and purpose. Something that William Harley and Arthur Davidson did right was they injected this brand with real meaning and purpose. It transcended just the sum of its parts, the nuts and bolts. It looked at this idea of freedom, the lure of the open road, and identity. And I think in closing, I just want to encourage all of us and you guys to listen to, the tale of the two classes. Yes, we do need to take heed of what's going on. Be excited about it, embrace it, really, take it all in. This is an incredible time in human history, this little pocket of time. People are going to look back and go, this is where the transition happened. And I think that, people are going to look at this, and I believe we should embrace it, because this is just going to continue. But at the same time that we look at all this new technology, I also think we should look inwards as human beings. And I think when we start a project, we should ask ourselves, what does it mean? What does it mean to me? What is it that I'm trying to do? What is the purpose? And ask these questions of ourselves, and I think the answer will just propel that project into something that's truly timeless. Thank you.